Jenny, it's very nice to see you again. I saw you live and in person very recently, which is actually rare for me. Usually when I'm podcasting with someone, I'm like, it's great to see you virtually. I've never met you in real life, but I had the pleasure of meeting you in real life last weekend at the Battle of Ideas Festival, which was great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you? How are you? It was lovely to meet you in person because I've been following your journey for bloody years, it feels like. So,
Yeah, I'm doing great. I had a great weekend in London. I just love the UK turfs. You guys are very special, which I don't know if you realize that because you live there, but from my perspective as somebody who is Canadian, I am also American actually, but I've never lived in America. So I spent, 40 years living in Canada. I obviously began my turf journey in Canada mostly alone for a very long time. And I said this at on one of the panels that I was on at the Battle of Ideas festival, and I talked about this in other contexts as well. But I just sort of like will be eternally grateful to and impressed by all the turfs across the pond because first of all, when I was getting canceled, I got so much support from turfs across the pond, and it made a huge difference just in terms of me not having like a mental breakdown and in terms of
yeah,
amplifying what was happening to me, but also I was so inspired and impressed by the bravery and the courage and the wit that I saw from the UK and the Scottish turfs that I wasn't seeing anywhere else at the time.
yeah. I mean, so when you came over to visit in 2019, I was actually invited to come to the Parliament to your talk by Joan McAlpine. I wasn't sort of involved in the in any campaigning sense or anything, but I think it'd already been quietly clocked that I wasn't having the whole people cancelling people in the arts. So I mean, I used to work in the arts, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners won't will never have heard of me. But I used to work in the arts, and I'd refused to cancel other writers and poets who were getting hounded over this issue already. Most specifically, the poet Maggie Gibson, who's in her 70s now, but was in her 60s, and a wonderful, magical feminist poet. And I was hiring her for things, and I'd reached out to her in 2016 because I'd just felt like gender identity ideology was scaffolding around me, and I had very few people to talk to about it. And Maggie Gibson was one of the only people in my circles in Scotland, in the arts in Scotland, that I could see trying to have a discussion about it on very politely on her Facebook page. And I just thought, oh God, I barely know her, but I'm going to email her. And I'd emailed her in 2016 and we'd met up and I'd gone, oh, thank God, I'm not going insane, but I wasn't involved in campaigning really. And I couldn't come to your event, which was a shame because 4 weeks later, I started getting hounded. So it would have been quite useful to have actually come and met the women who, to me, I was watching what was happening to you in horror for like a few years, and as soon as I started getting hounded, I knew what was about to happen. I knew the pattern. I knew it wouldn't be as high profile as yours, but I knew what was about to happen, and sure enough, it did. So, and yeah, being in Scotland has been really, really useful because we're tiny. So we all kind of just like find each other and meet up. And honestly, I seriously was like, bloody hell, what would it be like if I hadn't had the support myself? So I completely understand what you mean about the Scottish turban.
Yeah, I mean, and you guys in both Scotland and the Brits, I mean, you were able to accomplish quite a bit. You got way ahead of Canada and the US, I felt, just in terms of getting the debate out there into the public realm and into the media. And you have had some legal successes of late as well. But I know that some of you all said that was because you were able to watch what was happening in Canada and then respond in anticipation of how badly this could go very quickly if you didn't do something fast.
Yeah. Yeah, the urgency that I felt. I mean, so I've mainly focused on what happens to women who even try to have the discussion. So not so much the ideas themselves. So obviously everybody knows what way my bread is buttered, as it were. You know, obviously I'm in full agreement with the TERFs, but I've focused in my writing about what's happening, about how the debate is happening, and we got a heads up because the UK already had protections for people with the protected characteristic of gender reassignment. So we already had that. But what we didn't have was self-ID. And self-ID is what everywhere else started to get. So we were seeing what was happening as a consequence of self-ID everywhere else. And we were like, hod the bus. No, we are not having some wax my balls guy in Scotland walking into a freaking beauticians in Cumnock and demanding that this poor 16-year-old wax his balls. I mean, for goodness sake, you know, so that was one of the things that we were desperately trying, but people didn't believe us a lot of the time. We're like, oh, that can't possibly be happening. We were like, no, look at what's happening in Canada. What really terrified me was seeing the vandalism that was going on. Like there was a women's library that was vandalized, wasn't there, in Canada?
Yeah.
And then there was the stuff that happened at Vancouver Rape Crisis Centre. I mean, for God's sake. And I feel really bad that I hadn't clocked on to these things earlier, actually, because Julie Bindle's been writing about them since 2004. But yeah, seeing the protests against you just for trying to speak as well, horrifying.
Yeah, and I think that was most people's initial reaction. I mean, most people were kind of asleep at the wheel and didn't really realize what was going on. But then when you do start telling them what's going on or what could go on, you know, violent male criminals are going to be transferred into women's prisons. Men are going to be able to have access to women's transition houses and shelters. This is going to nullify women's rights. Men are going to be competing against women in sport. I think people didn't believe the TERFs and thought we were being hysterical and, of course, very mean.
Yes. And also, when they realised that we weren't, they would either just turn away or act as if it didn't matter because it was just one or two people. I'm like, only bloody takes one. You know, it only takes one guy on a sports team to ruin an entire league. It only takes one man in a women's prison to terrorise the entire population. So yeah. I mean, it's the most extraordinary thing. And I still sometimes can't believe we're actually going through it, even though I'm very used to it now that I'm 6 years in, but I still get astonished by the fact this has even happened, and also that it's still happening. Even though, as you say, in the UK, we have totally won. We totally won the legal arguments. And I think we've won the moral arguments as well.
Yeah.
But it's still freaking happening.
Yeah. It's wild to even think that this ever, like, I think about this all the time. Like, how is this even a real thing? This is so crazy. Like, what psyop is this that we would have to spend, you know, a decade insisting that you can't change your biological sex?
Fucking crazy.
And trying to define what a woman is? Like, it's crazy. It's crazy.
It feels like the last wee while has felt like being in simultaneously in every episode of this late night Channel 4 show that we used to stay up and watch when we were teenagers in the 90s called Eurotrash. And it was all these sort of crazy stories from Europe about underground sex clubs and sort of weird artists who made, I don't know, paintings out of their own feces. It was very, very strange, but it was supposed to be a sort of irreverent take on weird things happening in European culture, sort of like underground subcultures or whatever. So it simultaneously felt like living in every episode of Eurotrash and the pious comment section of The Guardian at the same time. So really promiscuous stuff going on, really like in your face, hypersexualized things, and also transsexualism and people saying that toddlers can be trans, and people being incredibly pious about it all, very, very serious and very, you know, uptight. It's been a weird combination of things going on.
So tell us your villain origin story. How did you, I mean, you wrote a book, Hounded, about your experience being canceled. I don't know if that's the most appropriate term, but we can talk about that a bit later. In the arts scene, I suppose, because you spoke out. Tell us what happened.
Well, I'll be as brief as I can. For me, everything started in 2013 when I realised that it wasn't even that people were saying that men were literally women. The first thing that caught me was I was booked to run a creative writing workshop. So I was a poet and an events producer, and I also ran lots of education projects for young people in particular, in poetry and theatre and creative writing. And I did performance training as well. I was booked to do a workshop for an LGBT, I can't even remember if the T was on there at the time, but I was booked to do a workshop for this group. And as I was walking up the stairs, the facilitator who'd booked me said, "Oh, just so you know, we're trying to normalise everyone introducing themselves with their pronouns at the start of every workshop. So I'll kick things off and then I'll hand over to you." And as we were walking up the stairs, I was thinking in my head, what the frick's a pronoun circle? What pronouns? What? So I'd never come across it before. And when we sat down and I cottoned on to the fact that people were saying she, her, or whatever, and I could tell that a couple of participants had no idea what the hell this was either. And it was the most weird, awkward start to a creative writing workshop I'd ever done. And after it was over, I just kind of hoped it would never happen again. I didn't really know what it was. And it didn't happen again for a couple of years. But I remember clocking that and going, that was weird. And then all of a sudden, it was like everybody around me was talking the language of cis and blah, blah, blah. So it started the way it does for a lot of people, in that I realized there was this set of ideas and that simultaneously you weren't allowed to question a single bit of it. And if you did, you were a Nazi, and people were being really, really strange. And then eventually, I mean, it comes to, well, I'll fast forward a bit. I did try to address it within my creative work in the arts, but we maybe talk about that later. But I just written a very successful stage show that was about sex, gender and feminism, but wasn't about this issue. But I think it had been clocked that I was not for going along with gender identity ideology because I wasn't cancelling women who'd been hounded already. And in 2019, I'd had a couple of glasses of wine, and a local arts magazine had just published a column by a well-known trans activist called Kathy Brennan, justifying violence against lesbians at a Pride March. And I'd had enough by this point, Megan. I was in a really bad mood. I'd had years of watching this crap in the arts. I'm so bored. And I made one tweet, and it was so polite that loads of people can't believe that this is what kickstarted it all for me. I said, "Hello, one of your commentators here advocates violence against lesbians at a Pride March. That's an astonishing thing to read in the Skinny. Just FYI." And that was it. And my life went fucking mental overnight. Like, hundreds of people unfollowed me in the arts. Hundreds of TERFs did follow me. Instantly, I just got absolute hell for this one fucking tweet that was so mild. And in the meantime, the editor of that magazine emailed me and apologized and said, "Gosh, no, you're right. That language kind of fell under my radar." And I was like, what is going on? So it started from there. But as soon as, you know this, as soon as you get the label TERF, people don't look back to see what you said. No. You just get called a TERF, and that's it, you know? And so the only way out then becomes through it. And so I had 7 months of quiet cancellation. Then everything went completely freaking mental in like February 2020. The Scottish Poetry Library attempted to stand up for me. They ended up getting accused of institutional transphobia and getting open letters. All of this is splashed across the Scottish arts press, but people hadn't actually come to me for comment a lot of the time. And so it was this totally mental thing. And then COVID happened, and we're all locked in our houses for a little while. So I set to writing an 8,000 word essay about exactly what had happened. And really unexpectedly, that essay, which was published in a really highly reputable literary journal, it wasn't even online at first, but it got picked up by the mainstream press, and I got loads of attention for it. And And it was kind of a wake-up call to a lot of folk in the Scottish arts who'd kind of just been trying to ignore all of this. Didn't really help my arts career because I got so much attention for that people were like, oh God, we'd better not hire her. Even if we agree with her, she's got loads of people who want to destroy her life. Which you'll know exactly. You know, the more notorious and the more coverage you get, the more people think you must have done something really controversial. So anyway, fast forward a few years, then yes, I was approached by Polity Books to, using the basis, I suppose, of that initial essay I'd written about my own hounding, to write a book that was about the pattern of harms that every single woman goes through when you get that label TERF. So whether you are a nurse or an office worker, a mid-career performance poet, for God's sake, or, you know, J.K. Rowling, the pattern of harms that you're put through is exactly the same. So the only way that it differs is in terms of survivability, visibility, and scale. So, you know, when I've written about kind of famous women who have been hounded in the gender wars, the scale of the abuse that they get online is very, very severe, but they may be protected from some of the economic harms. But all of us will have the exact same pattern of harms, because gender identity activism is cultural authoritarianism. it's every bad movement throughout history with its own genderist spin. So yeah, that came out last year, and since last year I've had a real turnaround, actually, in terms of my own visibility and my ability to survive having got that label TERF. So
I like that term, cultural authoritarianism, and especially as it's applied to trans activism. Because, I mean, I was listening to an interview that you did with Andrew Gold recently on his podcast, Heretics, and you talked about how there's no consequences for being a trans activist, essentially. You know, like, trans activists behave as though, and they say this over and over and over again, that they're very vulnerable, and they behave as though they're like fighting the man, you know, in some way. And it's so clear that they're not. I mean, not only are there zero consequences for supporting gender identity ideology, but you'll be supported. You know, it's easy accolades, and it has been for at least a decade, right? Probably a bit more than that even. I mean, there's never ever, I don't think, been any consequences for supporting transgenderism and trans activism. So it's interesting. I mean, I find that a lot of what trans activists do is a total reversal and a total projection onto women in particular, but, you know, really anybody who is labeled a TERF. You know, that term now, the TERF, of course, means trans exclusionary radical feminist, but it's applied to anybody, man or woman, non-feminist, whatever, who barely even speaks out against gender identity ideology, or even just defends women-only spaces or defends women's sports. You know, it can be so mild what you say. Just, you know, what you said was so mild. And to be attacked on that level is so crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you always find out things later on and you're like, oh, right, I see. So, I mean, one of the people who ended up going after me very, very heavily used to be quite a good friend of mine before they started transitioning. My rejection of that person, I think, I mean, I tried to remain friends. We'd actually even met up to try and remain friends, because I was like, look, I'm not, you know, I don't agree with your ideology, but I don't wish you any harm, and but, you know, we're going to have a discussion about what our red lines are, basically, if we're going to remain friends. And I said, listen, and so he said to me, well, my red line is that you don't go after my rights. And I was like, well, I've got no intention of doing that. But I hadn't realized that he thought his rights were things that his rights weren't. So I said, okay, well, fair enough. Well, my red line is,
don't worry, I'm not going to go after your right to vote. I promise.
Yeah, I was just like, well, I mean, I don't want you getting beaten up in the street. You've got a right to freedom from discrimination and whatever. So I'm not going to do that. It'll be daft. But I hadn't realised, as I say, that he completely misinterpreted the Equality Act. So, and I met up with him and I said, listen, my red line is you must never, ever demand that I say things that I know aren't true. So you must never demand that I say things like lesbians can have a penis and that some men can get pregnant. He turned puce and was just like, but some lesbians do have a penis and some men can get pregnant and you're just going to have to accept it. And I was like, okay, our friendship, I think, might be over. And then, although you wouldn't find him at the forefront of a lot of the things that have happened to me, I think that was late 2018. So I think stuff was happening behind the scenes and they were just waiting, I think, for a moment to go for me. Yeah. So, God, what even was my, what even was your question there? I've just gone off and one about this twat.
I mean, I was just talking about how, pardon, sorry.
The consequences. Yeah, there's no consequences for these people. Scotland is tiny. Everybody in the Scottish Arts knows who a lot of my hounders are. You know, I've never directly named any of them myself, but a couple of them have been picked up by the press. So the consequences for a couple of them have been a couple of bad days in the press, because the Scottish press is actually really quite good these days. And is really against houndings, I think, because they've got a very strong sort of freedom of speech elements. So they're very against the houndings. But apart from that, none of my hounders have lost any work. Quite the opposite. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Do you think that women get it worse in this particular, let's call it a debate, in terms of women who speak out against gender identity ideology? Do you think they get it worse than the men who speak out?
Yeah, I think on two levels. First of all, that we're harmed by the ideology itself, even if we don't say a word about it. So, even if we stay completely silent, or if women comply, they're still harmed by the ideology. But then you're harmed for speaking out about it, and then you're harmed the more you speak out about it. So it's like a 3 levels of harm. But the second thing is that it doesn't take very much for a woman to start getting hounded. So I said women shouldn't be throat punched at freaking pride marches or for having meetings, and I start getting the same pattern of hounding as other people who've said, other men who've said far more than that. So men shouldn't be getting hounded either. It's not something I want sex-based parity on, but you don't need to say very much as a woman to start getting it. Whereas men tend to have to say a lot more before it really matters. And I think men, not across the board, but I think a lot of men have managed to be uncancelled sooner than women manage it, is something I've noticed too. It's not their fault, but, just an observation.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, God knows. I think a lot of the men not all, but I think some of the men who've spoken out, who are maybe involved in this kind of world, the podcasting world and that kind of thing, they're maybe very well connected in a way that a lot of us women weren't, and perhaps moneyed in a way that some of us weren't as well. So I think that's kind of part of it. And I think some of the men joined quite late too. Obviously Graham Linehan is the most cancelled man who's been involved in this fight, I think. But others, seem to have managed to get back on their feet quite quickly. And I think that partly that's because of that first thing I mentioned. This is an existential issue for women. This is about our rights. This is about our definition and our language that we need in order to, even assert our rights. So it's very visceral for us as well, which takes up a lot of the headspace. I think there are different reasons for it. Yeah.
I think that most of the men who spoke up about this issue, a lot of them, you're right. I think that they already sort of had more power to begin with. They had more financial power, they had more institutional support, more social power, more political power. And so many of the women who spoke out and were canceled, were attacked over this. We're just, literally just regular women with nothing, like no platform, just, like women like Venice Allen, Maria McLaughlin, those kinds of women who just were like, what is going on? We should talk about this. Yeah. And, and we're just working class, there was nothing. Yeah, they didn't have any access to anything that these men had. And then the frustrating part was also that a lot of these men didn't really give the women who were canceled any support. And then they did kind of support one another. And then, of course, started asking, where are all the women? Where are all the feminists? Yada, yada, yada.
So annoying. So annoying. I know. I would every time I saw men saying that, I was just like, "Oh my God, you must be absolutely raging, Megan." And Julie Bindel as well. I was like, "Bloody hell! What you guys have been put through by this bloody movement. It makes me so angry. I get really angry on behalf of other women, which is good because that's what I've ended up writing about. I mean, for me as well, I say it in my book, like what I lacked in, money or whatever, I did make up for in terms of cultural clout. So because I'd been really involved in the Scottish arts since I was 20, quite scrappy, self-made, self-taught, like worked my way up through these like poshel literary institutions and stuff, kind of being a bit of a rabble-rouser, particularly in my 20s. And I'd got to a really good position in the Scottish arts. So I had quite a lot of arts journalists and stuff following me. So I was really lucky that I had that, because it meant that loads of people, perhaps who remember me from the pre-digital age, for example, when I was 20, like making my way up in this, they were like, wait, why are these people going after Jenny Lindsay? Nah, you don't do that kind of thing. So I had that, which was really, really good. And I felt an obligation to continue speaking out. But I think one of the reasons that I've benefited a little bit from not being that well known is because it has highlighted just how ludicrous this movement is to a lot of people. Like a lot of people in the world of newspapers or whatever in Scotland were just like, she's a mid-career performance poet, guys. What the hell are you doing? It's like, it's not like I was a legislator or anything. So the movement in Scotland showed itself up for what it was. Obviously, as I've got better known and I've now got a column, a weekly, and I've had quite a lot of attention in Scotland, and the wider UK this last year since the book came out as well, and Australia too. Oddly, apparently the book's done quite well in Australia. Hooray! And what Hounders do is they use the fact that you've managed to have any success, or the fact you're still breathing, as a sign that you've not been cancelled at all. Don't you know? So that's interesting as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, even when I was banned from Twitter in 2018, I would still, first of all, that was used against me. And that was really, really frustrating because, I mean, as most people are, I was banned for something pretty innocuous, but that you weren't allowed to say at the time, which is that men aren't women, and for misgendering the man you mentioned earlier, Jonathan Yaniv, now Jessica Yaniv / Jessica Simpson, who was going around to Vancouver estheticians and demanding a Brazilian bikini wax, and then, dragging those who said no through the Human Rights Tribunal. That it was used to cancel me further, because if I was scheduled to speak at an event, for example, the trans activists would harass the venue and say, she's so bad that she was even banned from Twitter. That's how hateful and horrible she is. Which is totally ridiculous, because people were banned and censored on Twitter for all sorts of silly things, including, of course, during COVID, just talking about facts about the vaccine. But, being canceled for saying that a man isn't a woman is a crazy thing to be banned from the internet for saying. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So the writer Victoria Smith, who I absolutely adore, her analysis of what has been going on here has been so useful. And she's pointed out, as have other writers, that the pattern of psychological abuse that's being meted out to women who get that label TERF is exactly the same as the psychological abuse that happens when women speak out about having been victims of domestic violence, for example. So it becomes a case of the harder he hits you, the worse your behavior must have been. And that's what it's like with the trans activists and the gender identity activists. It's like you say, oh, well, you've been banned from Twitter. There's no smoke without fire. You must have said more than that. And I think, like, when I've tried to explain to friends who are not in this, you know, and I say to them, oh, and my wee sister as well, who's not on social media, and I've said to her, yeah, well, I spoke out about lesbians getting throat punched at pride marches. Morris, go away. And she's like, you must have said more than that, right? And I'm like, no, not really. No, women get cancelled for loads of things. It's like, I thought the Scottish women should meet up and talk about this legislative proposal to change the definition of women in life and in law. And a feminist got, somebody attempted to assault one of the attendees. And people were like, oh, well, she must be a Nazi though, right? It's like, no. Nope. You know, they just assume that your behavior must have been worse than it was to justify them turning away, because I think most people want to turn away from it. So they have to convince themselves that you are horrific and that you deserve your treatment and that the people going after you have a point.
Yeah, and they pretend as though it's not really that bad and you haven't really been canceled. People who were fans of cancel culture did this in all contexts, you know, denying that cancel culture existed or saying, you know, oh, he'll be fine, or, you know, well, she's it's like, she's not dead, you know. She's okay. She's still speaking, right? And it's like, okay, I mean, I'm censored on the internet, and every time I am scheduled to or try to speak anywhere, the venue pulls out and we have to find another venue last minute, and we're protested and we need bodyguards and a police presence, and the media won't speak to me. But okay, I still exist, so I guess I haven't really been canceled.
I know. I mean, I lost so much work that I had to leave Edinburgh because I could no longer afford to live there. And that was during the silent cancellation stuff that I made that decision, because I was having clients sort of write to me and say things like, just so you know, that 1,800 quid performance training you usually do, we're not doing it. We can't hire you for it this year. And just so you know, it's not because of the controversy. And I'm like, for fuck's sake, of course it is. If you're telling me that, then of course it is. And other people who I knew that worked in like these literary institutions, because I used to be really in with all of these fannies, you know, I used to be in that world. And so people would tell me things, they'd be in my DMs, and there was all these people who I could tell were actually having a fun time telling me about these things that come up about, oh, Jenny Lindsay is so controversial. And I'm like, I have barely said a word. But like, I was losing paid work and I had people frightened of hiring me as well. And it was making me miserable. And what people forget, though, because my profile is higher now than it was, is that this wasn't my world, though. You know, I was in the arts, I was in poetry, and I was in theatre. I've lost all of that work. So yes, I might be more prolific and I might be sort of more high profile now, but I was in the arts. So I have been cancelled from the arts entirely. And my education work was the last thing to go. I used to do lots of creative writing projects and stuff like that. And I only lost the last education client 2 years ago. Last year. No, God, it was last year. It was last year. Yeah. Because I was too high profile as a nonfiction writer. So she felt she had to cancel me from the project.
Did anyone stand by you at the time?
Yeah, I was really lucky. I mean, obviously Maggie Gibson, the poet who had been hounded before I was, she stuck by me. And I was really lucky that Jerry Cambridge of the Dark Horse Literary Magazine, who I knew a little bit, but, you know, it's not like we were best pals or anything like that. He'd been watching my hounding in total horror. And he's more of a literary poet, and I was more from the sort of live poetry scene and events and all the rest of it. But he'd been watching it in horror, and it was him who reached out. And he hates it when I say stuff like this because it's a big burden to own, but he pretty much saved my hide. He really did, because I don't know what I'd have done if he hadn't given me that platform to write that initial 8,000 word essay. And he was a brilliant editor and he helped me perfect it, because my thing was, right, I'm getting cancelled. I want to be getting cancelled for the right reasons. I want people to understand and to know exactly what happened and to make up their own minds. So if I had clients, as I was having, writing to me and saying, oh, we're not doing this project, we're having to drop you, I could then send them the essay and say, okay, well, this is exactly what happened. Can you justify what you're doing? And I felt so much relief after I'd written that essay. I really, really did. So he stood up for me, and that was great. But I lost the majority of my friends. And as people have said, what, really, the majority? I was like, yes, but that was my own fault, because I was in the fucking arts. Loads of my friends were artists and writers and poets, and it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal to go through. But at the same time, what are you supposed to do? Gender identity ideology is insane. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to so many people over the years who've had these kinds of experiences, and most of them are like you. They're like, I lost all of my friends, and it made me feel really grateful because I didn't lose all of my friends. I lost a lot of friends, but there was a ton of friends that I maintained. Because I think I had a wide diversity of friends and a big social circle. So first of all, I had friends who were TERFs, but I also had friends that I'd known since I was 13 years old. I had friends from high school who knew me not because of politics, but because we've known each other and been friends for a very long time. Most of the people who stuck by me were men, my male friends. Obviously, like I had, boyfriends at the time who stuck by me. That was actually pretty big, because I think you need somebody close to you when you're going through this kind of thing. But again, I did, like, losing friends is really hard and really awful, and I did lose a lot of people, but I never felt alone or isolated or like I had no social life or friend circle. And I think the lesson to be learned is sort of, I don't want to blame the victim kind of thing, and I'm not necessarily talking about you specifically. I'm sort of thinking of some other people right now. It's like, don't make all your friends through politics. Like, don't only become friends with people who share your politics. Is really just make normie friends, makes all sorts of friends, like a diversity of friends, people from all sorts of different places and backgrounds, and if you lose them, okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, a couple of things on that. Just to be accurate, I lost all of my friends in the Edinburgh arts world, is really what I meant. But what I did do is, I left Edinburgh, this beautiful city that I loved. I was so in love with Edinburgh.
It is so
for
beautiful.
most of my adult life. I lived in Edinburgh, and losing Edinburgh was actually one of the worst things. But I moved back to this, I moved to this tiny town on the west coast of Ayrshire where I grew up. So I've reconnected with a lot of school pals and things who read about what has happened to me, and they're like, your life is insane. Oh my God, you're fine. Yes, these people are mental. What's wrong with them? And also, I made so many better friends. Before I left Edinburgh, I didn't particularly know For Women Scotland. I didn't particularly know Murray Blackburn Mackenzie and a lot of the other, because I wasn't involved in the campaigning. But since I got hounded, since I got cancelled, and particularly since I wrote that first essay, folk have been absolutely amazing. And yes, it's a strange one. It is an odd one, because some people who've been really supportive of me, they do still go a bit at how much I love the Free Speech Union. I'm on their advisory council. I love Battle of Ideas, and a lot of my sort of pals who are in the feminist and the sort of political stuff, they're a bit like, oh, I'm not sure. And I'm like, they're great fun, shut up, it's fine. But it's, oh God, this last year has just been so amazing. It really has. I've socialized more in the last year than I think I did in the previous 4.
Okay,
It's
good.
been excellent. I'm so glad I wrote the book. So, yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. Um, it sort of seems like cancel culture is over, or at least coming to an end. It's not as popular a trend as it has been over the
Yeah.
past 10 years.
Yeah.
But cancellations are still happening. You recently wrote an article about, I might pronounce her name wrong, the Irish singer, Roisin Murphy? How do you say her name? Pardon?
Roisin.
Roisin. Okay, I did say it completely wrong. I'm sorry, I hadn't heard of her until this cancellation stuff. Roisin Murphy.
Roisin
So she's
Murphy.
an Irish singer, and she, as far as I'm aware, you can fill us in a bit more, expressed some concerns about the medical transitioning of kids, and she said something about this on Facebook, and has been subject to a cancellation campaign.
Yeah, so Roisin Murphy was the front woman of a band that were super popular in the 90s and the early noughties called Moloko. And it's that kind of sort of electronica dance music. I mean, come on, I like music for bedwetters, so it's not really my scene, but she massive figure. And 2 years ago she made, like, again, it's that thing, it starts with an offhand comment, doesn't it, that then gets twisted and pulled apart. So she wrote something on Facebook. I don't even know if it was on her own, like, I don't think she'd done a big post about it. It was a comment underneath an article or something about, and she said, puberty block. Can I swear, by the way? I probably shouldn't, because I don't want to. So she said, puberty blockers are fucked. They're terrible, and what are we doing, kind of thing. It was just an offhand comment, but then that got took from her Facebook page and put on Twitter, and everybody went mental over it. And she did that thing, when you first get thrust into this stuff and you're not used to it, and you're not used to having online houndings and stushies and she tried to, stem back the tide, and she did that thing where she's half apologized 2 years ago by saying, I'm really sorry if I've upset anyone, but I do think it's something to be worried about, but I'm not an activist, I'm an artist, so let's draw a line under it, kind of a thing. Doesn't work, because obviously as soon as you've said one thing, they keep coming for you. So she's had 2 years of the usual shit that women get, cancellations, friends cutting her off, festivals have dropped her. She's occasionally, as you do, said like one or two other things, but a few days ago, she released what, to me, as a former poet, it makes some people very sad when I describe myself as a former poet, but I am. As a former poet and a former artist and a former performer, she to me, what she released on X is a perfect artist statement of intent, which artists used to do. You used to always have your sort of artistic statement on your website or something about the way that you approach your art. And she basically said she'd had enough, no more blackmail. She believing that people can change sex is the foundational lie that's causing all of this. I'm not doing it. I'm not playing your game anymore. Boom. And it was perfect, because eventually you just have to be that equivocal. You have to put it out there. And she's right. She's not an activist. She is an artist, and she should be able to go ahead with her work. What the hell does it matter if she doesn't believe that men are women? What the fuck does that matter? She's an artist. She's making tunes. She's making music. She's trying to have joy and fun and blah, blah, blah. And not everyone wants to be an activist, but you can't demand that an artist go along with your interpretation of the world. And what she's also had is what a lot of writers and artists get, which J.K. Rowling has had in abundance, is that whole, but you were my queen, you were my mother, you were the person who saved me from my teenage hell. And she's like, I'm not your mum. I'm not your mum. So she's kind of making that thing as well. And she's had absolute hell for it since she put the statement out. But I thought it was wonderful, so I wrote my weekly column about it. So that's me having written 2 articles for 2 different publications about 2 fabulous Murphys 2 days in a row.
Nice. Love it. I love a Murphy, a fellow Murphy. Can you tell us more about what happened to her? What did the cancellations consist of beyond being attacked online?
Yeah, beyond the online stuff. I mean, the online stuff is hard enough, but it's the least of it, isn't it? So from what I understand, and obviously I'm not directly in touch with Roisin Murphy, though she did give me a comment for my piece, for which I'm super grateful. But so from what I understand of it, from what I've seen, she's been dropped from festivals, and that's really difficult for an artist like Roisin, because you're touring, and that's a lot of your money, you know. So she's been dropped from festivals. She's had deep slaggings from fellow artists. Like, it's quite, I didn't get this into my piece because it's only 900 words, but there's two in particular who've spoken out against her. One goes by the Blessed Madonna and is completely unhinged, this DJ who's released this really unhinged like rant about Roisin Murphy and blah blah blah. The other one is an artist I actually really like called CMAT, who I think she's just won some big prize actually, but she's a fellow Irish songwriter as well, and I really like her tunes. She's very talented, but she's made the approach that was quite common in my own hounding, which is what I call the fretting middlings. So she's put out this statement saying, "Oh, love to my trans siblings, and isn't this all so hard?" and blah blah blah. So it's like this woman who's making out that she's this wonderful, sweet person, and maybe she is a lovely sweet person. But she doesn't realize she's been deeply unkind in what she's doing. And those are the type of women I call the fretting middlings, because they're the ones who aren't really that political. They don't really realize what's going on. And they're like, "Oh, I just want to spread love and joy and blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, yeah. Loads of love and joy here, as all losing our freaking incomes and sanity. So she's had that kind of stuff too. I imagine, and this is me projecting entirely, but I imagine her life has been made very difficult at venues, even if her gigs go ahead. So I know that with myself, when I was still trying to get my old performing career back, even if I managed to secure a venue, the staff might be weird with me. People would be harassing the venues, and you'd be worried all the time about who might turn up. Maybe the sound engineer would be a dickhead. So she's probably had all of that stuff going on too, because her statement doesn't come from nowhere. And because I know what's happened to other women who've been harmed at that level in the sort of performing arts, I can imagine her last 2 years has been pretty isolating, because you don't always want to talk about everything that's happened as well, because you want people to think you're okay. Do you ever get that? You know, you're like, you don't want to sort of, A, you don't want to wallow in it yourself because it's shit, but B, you don't want people to know like how much effect these fuckers can have.
Yeah. No, you don't want to. Well, I don't anyway. And I mean, this is probably partly my personality, because other people still don't seem bothered by this, but I don't want to show weakness. I don't want anybody to think that I have hurt feelings, or that I feel upset, or that I'm being affected, and I'm like, nope, I'm good, it's fine.
I had noticed that. I remember really, I think
don't feel sorry for me. That's such a gross. I really don't relate to people who like it when other people feel sorry for them, because to me that was like the worst thing in the world. Like, it makes, I'm like, no, do not feel sorry for me. I am cool, thank you.
Yeah, no, I absolutely hate people feeling sorry for me too. It makes me feel really guilty. Weirdly, it makes me feel guilty if people worry about me, or they're this, that, and the other. But I am obvious. I mean, that was a really fine line I had to tread in writing Hounded, and that was a challenge, because obviously, you know, I'm writing a book about really insane stuff that I think has to be taken really seriously, but it mustn't be a sort of, oh, wallowing in self-pity kind of thing. I think women who have been hounded and who come through it, regardless of whether they're still, you know, struggling or whatever, I think it's very brave to confront what's happened to you. But I will say what I had noticed just from being one of your Twitter followers and your Facebook followers was, like, when you went to Mexico, I think on holiday or whatever it was, I was like, that is the cocktail party and the partying of a brave little squirrel. She's determined not to let this ruin her life.
Like, I am living my best life. Yeah. And I am. And I think that it makes people really mad. I'm
Yes.
very happy. Like, and people, I think some people just don't believe me, but I'm sure you get this too. You must be so miserable. And I'm like, no, I'm great. But I'm really, really good. Very happy. Thanks.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's kind of yeah, it's kind of weird. I mean, this last year for me has been wonderful and it's been very strange. I just have a really strange thing happen that happened just a couple of months ago where somebody was like, you have kept yourself living in trauma because you are obsessed with houndings. And I'm like, no, I have found a way to write my way up, out, and through it while still calling you all cunts and also creating a really good book that, I mean, it was difficult because I was holding all these women's stories in my hands and I had to do a really good job with it. And it was stressful to write. I'm not going to lie. There was one point in late 2023 where I was like, oh God, am I going to be able to finish this bloody thing? Like my deadline was the 15th of January and I was like, oh, I'm so depressed. This is hard. But I did it and I'm so proud of myself. And this person was all like, you could have just walked away and you could have just left it. And I was like, what else was I going to do? I'm not very good at many things. The
And
only
why
things I'm
should
good
I
at,
do that?
and why should I? I'm good at writing, speaking, and teaching. I can't go back to teaching because every time you Google me, transphobia row, rocks Scottish poetry world is one of the first things that comes up. And I don't want to. I refuse to let these people stop me writing and speaking. So it's brilliant that I've managed to write my book, which was very well received, brilliantly reviewed. It sold pretty well as well, particularly for someone who's a debut. And it's upped my profile. And within 8 months, I'd landed a weekly column. I am fine.
Yeah.
But this person was trying to convince me that I wasn't, that I was this. I was like, what story are you watching?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the other thing. That's like you're so obsessed with this issue. Why don't you just move on?
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous for a number of reasons, not least of which being that, we've been forced to be obsessed with this issue. Like, I don't think that anybody wanted to have to explain over and over and over again what a woman is and why men shouldn't be allowed to take their penises out in the girls' change room. I don't think that's what any of us
No,
wanted to focus our time on. And yet we
no.
have to, it's such a big and important issue in a wide variety of reasons, for free speech reasons, in terms of women's rights, in terms of the impact on kids and the harms done to kids through transgender ideology and through the transitioning of kids, through, just the gaslighting and the being forced to lie about reality and what you know in your gut, and that you don't have to know very much about biology to know that a man isn't a woman. It's just, this is a major breach of everything ethical that exists in society.
I mean, it's extraordinary. And the point of writing my book wasn't to, it wasn't say, oh, we've all been so hard done by. It was to try and find a way through this. I mean, I do think we've all been hard done by because I did not want to be spending my life actually saying, no, Mildred, you're not allowed in the women's creative writing class because you're a man. I did not want to be spending my life doing these things, but this ideology came at us very, very forcefully, and we had to respond, and we had a choice in how we responded, and we've seen the choices that everyone's made, and the choice that we've made is to confront it directly, and that was a different impulse for me as a writer, because I was a creative writer, I was a poet. As a poet, I did not confront things directly. I told it slant. I used humor or analogy or da-da-da. But when this happened, when the hounding happened, I was like, I need to confront this directly. So I need to use plain language. I need to address this in prose. Maybe I'll go back to creative writing at some point, but I feel compelled to speak out about it. And I think I'm good at it. I think I'm good at speaking out about it directly. So with the book, what I was trying to identify, as I say, was the pattern of harms that every single woman goes through. Specifically women, because for us it's an existential issue, as I said. And so I identified, the psychological, social, economic, and democratic harms every single one of us has been facing, whether it's you, whether it's me, whether it's J.K. Rowling, whether it's the two anonymous women that are in my book. One of whom is a trans widow. We've all faced the same pattern of psychological abuse, social ostracization, economic detriment, and living in a democracy that is acting anything but democratic over this issue. And I've done that because I had to. I mean, the point of my book isn't even to argue you must agree with everything that I believe about gender identity. It's to say, even if you don't agree with my views on gender identity, or even if you don't agree with Meghan Murphy or Kelly J. Keane or Jane Clare Jones or Julie Bindel or whoever it is anything that's happened to us justifiable?
Yeah.
Even if we're wrong. I mean, we're not. We're completely right. But even if we were wrong, nothing that's happened is justifiable. It's not justifiable that you felt, I know that it wasn't just for this reason, but it's not justifiable that you felt that you had to leave Canada. It's not justifiable that I lost my arts career. It's not justifiable that Kelly J. Keane has been assaulted in public how many times now? It's not justifiable that Jane Clare Jones can't get a job in academia when she's a total smarty pants. It's not justifiable what's happened to Julie Bindel for over 20 years. It's not justifiable. None of this is justifiable, even if we're all stupid and wrong. We're not. We're great.
Sure. Well, yeah, we're not stupid or wrong. Do you think that transgenderism is over? Do you think that we're seeing the tail end of this ridiculous trend?
Oh, God. I think it's like Helen Joyce says, it's never going to go back in, the genie's never going back in the bottle. But I do think that it's becoming, I think it's going down. I know that I'm not a statistician, so I'm kind of being wary about that, the stats that came out recently. Also, I'm allergic to hope. I think
Same.
I think it is. Anecdotally, I am hearing from, for example, teacher friends that there's less and less young people identifying as non-binary and trans.
They don't think it's cool anymore. That's what people like. I have some parents of the sort of younger, kids who are, in, I guess, the early years of high school and the later years of elementary school. Like, it's not a cool thing anymore the way that it was a couple of years ago even.
I think because people have noticed that that people have sort of come to realize, oh God, no, there are actually harms to this that I maybe hadn't thought about. And I think there's the cool factor as well. If adults are pushing something, then if you're younger, you're a bit like, no thanks.
Yeah, of course. You want to rebel against everything you possibly can, if you're cool anyway. Otherwise,
yeah. Well, this is it, because originally this came. Yeah, I mean, originally this came out of the kids wanting to rebel against, elder generations that they thought were boring and gender conforming and we're all cis, boring, blah, blah, blah. But now, I mean, what does it mean to be queer now? Queer is totally mainstream. It's bloody everywhere, it's not subversive at all. So the subversive thing now is to reject it. So, yeah, we'll see.
Thanks so much for talking with me. Again, it was so great to meet you recently in London. I hope that it's not the last time that we get to see each other in person. I'm sure that it won't be. I need to try to get back there more often. It's so great to be there with you all. And thanks for coming on the podcast. Can you let everyone who's watching or listening know where they can find you online and where they can find your book, Hounded?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm on X as at Ms. J. Lindsay, MS J. Lindsay. I've got a Substack as well called The Schism Ring, where I post irregular essays and thoughts, mainly about the arts and culture and that kind of thing. Because even though I have left the arts, I'm still very, very in love with the arts, and I want it to save itself somehow. What else? Hounded is available from Polity Books. It's also online. It's available in Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, and the UK from Amazon, wherever we'll stock it. And yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. Oh, I've got a YouTube channel. I've also just set up a podcast with Rosie Kay about the arts. So it's called the Unscripted Podcast. So follow that as well. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, thanks again for talking with me, and I hope that we speak again soon.